Season 18 right now, so I'm 27 years old. For about as long as I can remember, we've been doing television, traveling all over the country, but we live right here in Michigan. I only live 40 minutes from here, so I'm at Jay's all the time. But we travel all over the country doing fishing shows, and primarily what we do is a lot of trout, salmon, and walleye. We'll target a lot of different species, but where we cut our teeth is we do a lot of walleye fishing, and we do a lot of salmon fishing. We travel all over the country salmon fishing, But right here in the Great Lakes region, it's as good as it gets, right? We have great fishing in Lake Michigan. We have great fishing in Lake Ontario. We have great fishing in Lake Huron. It just goes on and on and on. So this seminar that I have laid out here is going to be kind of an overview of salmon fishing. And the way that I set my seminars up is with a little bit of video. We'll play some video, and then you guys can watch that video. After that, we'll talk about that segment. After we've exhausted that topic, we'll move on to the next, and we just keep rolling forward. And this video is actually video from Fishing 411. Some of this video was shot right here locally, in Lake Michigan waters, and other of it was shot in Lake Ontario. The one thing with salmon is that they like to eat, and the way that we target salmon doesn't really change wherever we go. When we're fishing the Great Lakes, the way that we target these fish are pretty much exactly the same, with some small tweaks, and we'll talk about that in the seminar. But I thought what we would do is I'll play this first clip. In the first clip, we're going to talk about spring coho fishing, because that's happening right now, right? Like, you guys could go hook up to your boats tomorrow and go catch a pile of coho. So I thought we would start off with coho fishing, and then we'll kind of transition into king salmon as we go on. But if you guys are ready, we'll play that first clip.
Time, you're going to look at Lake Michigan and you're going to go, where the heck do I start? It is such a big body of water. But the nice thing about the spring is it makes this really big lake really, really small, because you're only looking at a small area for the most part when it comes to coho fishing in the spring. We're looking for the warmest available water. Now that's going to be found in a couple spots. It's either going to be found shallow, where the actual sky is warming up the water and that shallow water warms up a little bit faster, or you're going to find artificially warmed water like in front of a power plant. Now Michigan City has a power plant, so if you get here earlier in the year, you might want to look around that power plant. We're a little bit later spring, and now this shoreline, the whole edge of shoreline of Lake Michigan has had time to warm up. So where these fish have come up into the shallow water to warm up, they're going to find bait here in this shallow water, and of course they're going to come up here to feed. A lot of times these cohos will be in school, so if you get one or two, you might be able to go through that school 2 or 3 times and get a half a dozen fish out of one of those schools. After you've exhausted that school of fish, now you go looking, and the way you go looking is just keep working up that shoreline, and eventually you're going to find another pot of these cohos. One of the things about springtime coho fishing is that there's a multitude of different presentations that's going to catch you fish. And you kind of have to let the fish tell you on a day-to-day basis what it's going to take. Now, more traditionally, what I would say is the most popular would be a spoon. When you think about trout and salmon fishing, spoons are a very popular presentation here in the Great Lakes. And we have those in the presentation here today. But one of the things that I love to fish in the spring are body-style baits. Primarily when we're fishing the shallow water. Right now we're in that 15 to 20 feet of water. We're using body baits, things like the Maglet 3.5, or in this case, this is actually a thin fin. We're flat lining them behind the back of the boat, meaning that we're putting about 30-40 feet of line out, hooking them up to an offshore tackle planer board, and sending them out to the side. But what the planer boards do is allows you to stack multiple lines aside, where we can put 3-4 lines on either side of the boat, really cover that water column, cover as much water as possible to try to get as many fish in the boat as possible. We're putting about 30-40 feet of line out, hooking them up to an offshore tackle planer board, and setting them out to the side. Well, what the planer boards do is allows you to stack multiple lines aside, where we can put 3-4 lines on either side of the boat, really cover that water column, cover as much water as possible to try to get as many fish in the boat as possible.
Okay, so that particular episode, go to this slide here, that particular episode that we shot for Fishing 411 was shot in Michigan City. Southern Lake Michigan. One of the things about Southern Lake Michigan is that in the springtime, just about every fish in Lake Michigan is going to be in the southern end of the lake. It's shallower water, it warms up faster, and all of a bait throughout the wintertime kind of get pushed down to that southern end of the lake, and so you get a lot of food down there, and salmon like to eat, so they're going to follow the food. And so it's a great time of the year to target salmon, because you have a lot of fish. You have Lake Michigan's a huge fishery, and it gets pushed all down to the southern end of the lake. It concentrates a lot of fish in a small area. And when we shot this show, it was actually the middle of May when we shot this show last year, and it was late enough in the spring that that whole shoreline has warmed up, and that all becomes really fishy water. You can basically just launch your boat, and it doesn't matter if you have a 16-foot aluminum boat or a 30, 40-foot long boat. It doesn't matter, because we're not running a long ways to get to these fish. It's what I love about spring coho fishing. It doesn't matter what equipment you have. You can probably get out there with what you have in your garage and target them. And a lot of times I hear on big water, Great Lakes salmon fishing, you think about having to run way offshore to target fish. And these spring cohos are just simply not that. You can see from the video how close I was to shore pretty much the entire day. And what I like to do later in the spring is just start trolling up that shoreline. And we use a lot of different things. Like I said in the video, we can use spoons, you can use body style baits. One of the things about cohos is they love to eat. So really it's finding these fish. And the best way to do that is to troll relatively fast, 2.5, maybe even up to 3 miles an hour, cover water and just try to find these pods of fish and work your way up and down that shoreline. Now, if you're looking to go earlier in the year, then these power plants, it's artificially warmed up water from the power plants, and that'll bring fish in there. What we're looking for ideally is high 40s. Really, in my mind, I'd like to see 50 to 55 degree water temps. If I have that, that's ideal. So if you go early, you're not going to find that warm water unless you find the artificially warmed water that these power plants are cranking out. So that kind of concentrates the fish even more. You know, I was actually coho fishing in March this year, and every single fish was piled right in to those power plants. As the spring progresses, they spread out a little more, but again, it's going to be those shorelines that warm up much faster than the rest of the lake, and that's where you're going to find these fish. Maglip 3.5, I have one sitting right here. You know, if you've watched Fishing 4-on-1 before, you've seen us talk about the Maglip a bunch. For me, it's like a confidence bait, and I actually have a segment talking more about the Maglip. But this 3.5 size, we've caught walleyes with them, lots of walleyes with them. We've caught lots of king salmon, we've caught lots of cohos. It's just kind of a bait for me that when I put it in the water, pretty much everywhere we are in the Great Lakes region, I just have a lot of confidence that I'm going to catch fish on this particular bait. It has a lot of action, works well for walleye, like I said, in warmer water. And for trout and salmon, doesn't matter what time of year it is, you put this bait in the water and they absolutely love this bait. More traditionally, for salmon fishing would be the spoon. And again, I have a segment that we're going to talk about more specifics into spoons. But for cohos, I like to fish a little bit smaller spoon, like a mini size spoon is something that I fish. So like the Silver Streak Mini is kind of a go-to size. Again, it's a smaller fish, right? Our spring cohos are a little bit smaller, so we use a little bit smaller presentation to match that hatch of what they would actually be feeding on. Any questions about cohos?
Just use normal walleye gear, right?
That's the awesome thing about coho fishing, right? Like, we're going to get into more of the meat and potatoes of like what I would consider summertime salmon fishing and what I use for gear for that. But the thing about coho fishing is I literally use my walleye equipment. I'm using a 7.5 foot medium action trolling rod with a line counter reel filled with monofilament. It's the exact same setup that I use for walleye fishing. And so that's exactly right. The same gear that I use for walleye trolling is the same gear that I springtime coho fish. Now you can fish, like in the video we had downriggers. If you have downriggers and you want to use them for spring coho fishing, you can absolutely use them. These fish are not scared of the boat. So even though we're fishing relatively shallow water, 10, 11, 12, 15 feet of water on a deeper side for coho fishing, you can run that downrigger ball down 7 feet and maybe run like a 20-foot leader off the back of your downrigger ball. These fish are just not afraid of the
It
boat.
gets a line in that's totally out of the way of your shoe.
Exactly. If you're fishing planer boards and you have your lines out to the side, now you have that whole back of your boat's wide open. You might as well put some downriggers. The cool thing about the state of Michigan being 3 lines per person, you go out with a few buddies and you can run a lot of gear. The thing about these cohos that have never changed is it's like absolute chaos when you hit a pot of these fish. So you'll be trolling around wondering if there's even a fish in Lake Michigan, and next thing you know, you got 4, 5, 6 fish out at a time. That's very common when it comes to coho fishing. You hit a pot of those fish, you catch a ton of fish, and then you turn around and you beat up that pod. That's the best way to stay on those fish is drop a waypoint on your graph when you do hit one of those pods, and then turn around and go back over those fish again. You'll go 2 or 3 passes through those fish before you kind of spread them out, and then you're right back to looking again. But I've had a lot of bad days of coho fishing that turn to be really good really quick. You can get even in a hurry when you finally find those fish.
It's like a zoo when you hit them.
Yeah.
How about Lake Huron? Anything, like Tawas, Alpena?
It's exactly the same. So with coho fishing, it really has to do with water temperature in the springtime, right? So the southern end of Lake Huron is really, really good. You know, Tawas, you're talking, I wouldn't consider that the southern end of Lake Huron. But what I'm looking for is warm water. Now, as the water warms up throughout the entire spring, then these fish spread out. So Lake Huron would set up exactly the same way as that Lake Michigan sets up. The southern end of Lake Huron would be where I'd want to target these cohos first thing in the spring. But as the water warms up, these fish start to spread out. They start to work their way back north again. Same with Lake Michigan. As they're working their way north, then some of these other ports further north will be good.
But still looking for the warmer water though?
100% always looking for warm
So
water.
Tawas Bay might produce a little later?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm always looking for that warm water. When I say warm water, I use that term lightly because all of a sudden, next thing we know, we have a warm spring and that water warms up really fast. But in my mind, ideally what I'm looking for is high 40s on the low side, but really 50 to 55 degrees is kind of ideal. So if I can find that, I normally find an active fish. All right, so I just want to do a quick overview on cohos. It's one of those things, it's a species of fish that I love to target because honestly, it's an easy species of fish to catch. If you want to catch a lot of fish, cohos, that's it, man. They love to eat, and in the springtime, they're just eating machines. So I want to do a quick little overview on cohos because it's going right now. But as we move on with the seminar, we'll start talking more about like Pacific king salmon, what everybody loves, the drag screaming kings, and ways that we would target those in the summer and then going on through into the fall.
And if you've never fished leg core before, we do seminars all over the country, and it seems like we hear a lot of people that are afraid of leg core. And I'm telling you, if you want to take your fishing to the next level, leg core is how you do it. You're going to catch so many fish on this, and it's such a versatile presentation where you're going to be able to use it for trout and salmon fishing, walleye fishing. Basically look at it like this. If there are suspended fish over deep water, it's pretty hard to beat leg core, and I'll tell you why. The reason why is leg core, it takes a lot of line to get deep, and there's no stretch in leg core. So the nice thing about it is you can get your lure a long ways away from the boat, but you also don't have any stretch. So when that fish bites, it's a direct hookup, and you lose very few fish on leg core because of it. And the way leg core works is it's a weighted line. So a 10 color of leg core is 100 yards of line. When you hear us say things like a 7 color or a 4 color or a 5 color, what that means is about every 10 yards the color of the line changes, and that allows us to know how deep that leg core is going in the water. And anytime you fish with inline boards, your highest line is your outside board and your deepest line is your inside board. So if I had 3 boards on one side of the boat, I might have a 3, a 5, and a 7 color of leg core. That's basically covering the water column, which is another reason why leg core is so effective. But the biggest thing is the Great Lakes are cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And so getting that lure far away from the boat and out to the side in combination with the planer board, it's very hard to beat how good leg core is. There we go. Nice fish, Dad.
Oh my goodness, Jake.
Oh, Dad, look at the size of that fish. That's about, I'd like to say it's about as big as they get in the springtime, but we're on Lake Ontario. We've caught much bigger kings in the spring. But I'm telling you, you travel the Great Lakes, you're going to be hard pressed to find a king salmon. Much bigger than that one right there in the month of May. So that last king came on a spoon, which is a very common technique for salmon fishing. In the size of the spoon that we use, this is a silver streak spoon that I have here, and it's called a mag spoon. And the mag size used to be super popular for salmon fishing all over the Great Lakes, but in most cases the Great Lakes forage has gotten a lot smaller. If you're looking at fisheries like Lake Michigan, we tend to use a lot smaller spoons in Lake Michigan. Now this is a standard size spoon, a silver streak standard, so you can see when I hold them up next to each other, there's a pretty good size difference there. But one of the things that we found in Lake Ontario, being that this is the last lake on the chain of Great Lakes, it kind of gets filtered. All the green water comes down to Lake Ontario. Because of that, there's a lot of good bait in this system, and there's a lot of plankton in this system. When you have a lot of plankton in a fishery like Lake Ontario, it makes the bait fish bigger. And when you have bigger bait fish, all we do as fishermen is just match the hatch. Because there's big alewives in Lake Ontario, we tend to go with a bigger size spoon. That's not to say that a smaller spoon couldn't get the job done on some days, but what we found is day in and day out, that bigger size mag spoon seems to do the trick for us.
Well, I think one of the things that you have to talk about when it comes to salmon fishing in the Great Lakes is how much it's changed over the years. I'm 27 years old. I'm not very old, right? But I can remember when the Great Lakes fished completely different for salmon than it does today. It's always changing. And so there used to be a time you could go out to Lake Michigan, you take a Lure Jensen Dipsy diver with a 6-foot leader and put a mag spoon on it and troll around the Great Lakes and catch all the salmon you ever wanted. Honestly, that's just not the case anymore. Our fisheries are getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And so we've had to change the way that we fish as the times have evolved and as our fisheries have changed. That being said, that's where leg core, in my opinion, is such an important part of our fish catching arsenal when it comes to salmon fishing. Our Great Lakes are clean. They're very clean. You go out to Lake Michigan, there's spots that you can see bottom in 100 feet of water. And when you're trying to target fish in that clean of an environment, getting the lure far away from the boat and hooking it up to like a planer board, setting it out to the side, is such an important way to catch fish once the sun comes up. I think we can all agree with salmon that when that sun is low, everybody's a hero, right? That's when these fish feed. And then all of a sudden the sun comes up, the bite stops, and people go in. Well, we absolutely can still catch fish once the sun comes up, but that's where our leg core lines make such a big difference, getting that lure a long ways from the boat. Now, leg core is one of those things, like I said in the video, it takes a lot of line to get deep, but there's no stretch in leg core. So your hookup ratio is really good. And I've had guys ask me, like, why can't I run like a jet diver or maybe a tadpole diver in front of my spoon to get it down? And the problem is we're trying to get so deep that we create a lot of slack in the line when you put something clipped onto the line, right? Like if I'm running a jet diver and I'm trying to target 40 feet of water, there's a pretty big bow in that line to get down to those depths. It's a significant amount of slack that when that fish bites, he has to pull that slack out of the line before you ever pull tight on that fish. Leg core slowly gets down deep in the water as you go along. So the nice thing about that, with no stretch in the line, when that fish bites, you get a direct hookup. We lose very few fish on leg core itself. I like to run a 40-foot long, 20-pound test fluorocarbon leader. My basic setup of the leg core line itself is I'll run a backer. Now that backer can be either braid or it can be monofilament. It's really personal choice at that point, whatever you want. But for sake of argument, I'll say I'll run a 20-pound test monofilament backer. I like to have at least 200 yards of line on the back of the spool. So that gives enough line that I can hook my planer board up, and when you get a big screaming king salmon on the line, they're just not going to spool me and take everything. So about 200 yards of backer on that line. Then I put my leg core. Now leg core is one of these things that we fish segment chunks of the leg core itself. So if you buy a spool of leg core, you're probably buying a 10 color, right? That's what comes in a spool. Now a 10 color is running me anywhere in that 50, 55 feet down range. Maybe I don't want to fish that deep. So I might have a segment of leg core that's 7 colors or 5 colors or 3 colors. Different segments, meaning how much leg core we're putting in the water is going to get us at different depths. And I fish different segments. And so what I like to bring with me on any given day when we're fishing is I bring two of every color. I bring 2 3 colors, 2 5s, 2 7s, and 2 10s. That's going to fish me anywhere from 15 feet down to 55 feet down. And the reason why I have 2 of them is because I want to be able to put one on the other side of the boat if it's working well. So I bring those with me. And then we'll get into temperature and that type of thing. But I always have those with me. Wherever I figure out where that temperature zone is, that's where I'm trying to stack my leads. So again, these are my planer boards out to the side. They're far away from the boat. Once I have that leg core on the line, then I have an additional 40 feet of fluorocarbon leader. The reason why I do such a long fluorocarbon leader is a couple things. One, the Great Lakes are clear, right? I like to have a long leader. But I start my season every year with a 40-foot long leader, and then things happen when we salmon fish, right? They get tangled in the downriggers. For whatever reason, I have to cut and retie throughout the season. That leader length gets shorter and shorter and shorter. But if I start with a 20-foot leader and have to retie 3 or 4 times, now I have to cut all the leader off and retie. So I just start with a long one and cut myself down throughout the season. I would say it's probably 20 foot long by the end of the season after cutting it here and there. So you get these fish in the boat and they're thrashing around and they put a nick in the line, and I want to cut that and retie it. So that's my basic leg core setup. We fish a lot of things on leg core, but what's the most popular is spoons. And it's never really changed in the Great Lakes. Spoons still catch a lot of king salmon. And so there's different sizes. That particular video was shot in Lake Ontario. And like I'd said in the video, we tend to fish a lot bigger spoons there, mag-sized spoons. Well, now we're going back to the old days in Lake Michigan. We have boxes and boxes of mag spoons because that's all we used to ever troll in Lake Michigan was big spoons. In recent years, I feel like I pull smaller and smaller spoons in the Lake Michigan system, and the reason for that is our forage base. We have smaller alewives. That's what these king salmon are feeding on, is alewives. Pretty much primarily that's what they're feeding on, is alewives. That's what they would rather eat over anything else. And so because our alewives are smaller within the system, we go to a little bit smaller spoon. And even dropping down to a mini size spoon is not too small for a king salmon anymore in the Lake Michigan system. What I like to do is you catch these fish and you cut them open. look and see what's in their stomach, because that teaches us a lot as fishermen. If you see what's in their stomach and they have little tiny alewives, well, maybe you want to match that hatch and maybe even drop your presentation down to a smaller size. Maybe it's a little bit bigger size alewives, you can go to a bigger spoon. Lake Ontario, when we cut these fish open, the alewives that are in them, they're huge, right? They're really big, and so it makes sense to fish a bigger spoon like this one right here. But in Lake Michigan, it tends to be the standard size silver streak spoon, or even dropping down to a mini size spoon. Questions?
Have you used your crankbaits on that lead core?
Crankbaits on lead core. That's a great question. Absolutely, you can fish a crankbait on lead core like this maglet. My biggest suggestion, though, is because a crankbait dives on its own, it can make it difficult to fish multiple lines aside with a crankbait and lead core. Changes the whole dive profile of the lead core. And so what ends up happening is if you put a crankbait on your outside planer board, when it's coming over all those other lines, it wants to dive a little bit deeper and it wants to hang up on those other lines, tend to get more tangles. And so when I'm fishing a bait like a maglip on lead core, I tend to fish them on my inside boards, I fish them on divers, and I fish them on downriggers. So my outside boards, I tend to try to keep the spoons because they fish over top of each other very well. When it comes to trolling, it never changes for me, whether it's lead core or monofilament or braid. I always have my outside planer board is my highest line. My next board in is a little bit deeper. My next board in is a little bit deeper. If I'm fishing 4 boards, that next board in even closer to the boat is deeper yet. So my outside is my shortest lead, being that it's the highest. My inside is my longest lead, being that it's the deepest. So if you're gonna fish crankbaits like these maglip with lead core, try to keep them on your inside boards.
Now, another question. You use 20-foot leader at the end of it, right?
Yep.
Okay, you got 10 line or 10, 10 colors out. How big a planer board are you using on your 10 color out there with that big a line?
So how big a planer board am I using with my lead cores versus what it is? So across the board, this is the OR12 offshore side planer. This is my workhorse. This does everything for me with lead core, meaning that from a 10 color of lead core to a 1 color of lead core, I pull this board. It pulls it out to the side, no problem. When I go to bigger, heavier gear, and what I mean by that is like I like to fish a steel line, like a weighted steel by Torpedo Diver. I like to fish a 300 weighted steel. It's kind of maxing out this board for what it can do. And so I'll go to the SST Pro Mag and make actually a bigger board. I carry those in my boat every day. I carry 2 of them. That's pretty much all I ever carry. And the reason for that is because if I'm fishing those super deep lines, it's most likely going to be just my inside boards, right? I still have a little bit higher lines, but from a 1 color lead core to a 10 color of lead core, I pull an OR12 every day. All right, we got a ton of segments, guys, so I'm just going to keep rolling through, and we'll get to it all, hopefully.
Okay, so I'm going to reset this thing again after our last fish. It's pretty simple. And, you know, I got my ball, and you can see everything hanging right there. And so I just simply set it down, and the desired depth is 65 feet. And so I just let it down. We're going fast enough that I can just slowly feed it line like this and let it out, and my gear trails back. As long as I can still feel that flasher thumping a little bit through my thumb, it's not tangled up. And so I'm going to put this thing back in the water. We literally put it in the water, land a fish, and I've got it back in the water within, 35 to 40 seconds after we drop the fish, and I'll be fishing again. The neat thing about this style of fishing is, I fish 7 rods back home, and so if I'm targeting fish at different depths as we're going through certain areas, just like here, it's like if I see a fish on the finder right now that's 20 feet below my targeted depth for my ball, all I have to do is right here. I don't have to mess with a downrigger or nothing. Boom, I just dropped it in 20 additional feet, and I'm fishing now for that fish, right? It's a quick reaction thing, so, it's just a really neat way to fish, and it's very, very, very simple, and the lead ball is very easy to use, so.
If we look at the evolution of salmon fishing in the Great Lakes, it basically started out in the 60s where we fished spoons and we caught as many salmon as we wanted. Over the years, salmon fishing has gotten, honestly, it's gotten more difficult, and we've had to refine our presentations as anglers over the year to be able to stay consistent and keep catching fish. And if you look at how we've created these evolutions, it's all come from the West Coast. We basically learned these presentations from the guys that are fishing on the West Coast and adapted them here to the Great Lakes. Now, one of the focuses on this week's show was actually get Jared out here from the West Coast and play with a new lure called the spin fish, which is a lure that's basically taking over the fishing out on the West Coast. A lot of people are using them, and I believe that it's going to become the wave of the future. It's going to be something that here in the Great Lakes we incorporate. So when Jared came out, we actually fished a lot of his methods that he would do back at home, and for that we were trying to figure out speeds, leader lengths, and the type of things it's going to take to make these lures fish here in the Great Lakes. Once we got all those details figured out, we were able to incorporate this technique into the way that we Great Lakes fishermen would fish, by fishing planer boards, by fishing our downriggers, and then instead of fishing dipsy divers, we decided to fish these lead weights. And this combination has worked very well, and we've been able to put a pile of fish in the boat. The coolest thing that we get to do for a job is get to play with all these new things and figure out what it takes to be the next best thing. We have caught a pile of fish on this West Coast style today, and it's really cool because it just shows that even though fisheries are a long ways away from one another, you can still use West Coast style tactics here in the Great Lakes. And the truth of the matter is, Jared and I talk about it all the time.
Oh yeah.
These are your fish.
Yeah, these are our fish. These came
are
from our
your fish.
hatcheries, you know, years and years ago, and you know, salmon are genetically programmed the same, right? And so the fact that I catch these fish out on the coast, West Coast, on these tactics, just I had to prove my point that we could catch them here. You know, the coolest part is us being able to figure out and how to adapt these techniques for the next cool thing that fishermen are going to do out here. And you know, it could be for the next 20, 30 years, they're going to use a similar tactic to what we're doing here. You're just going to migrate it from West Coast style to the East Coast style of fishing.
Exactly.
And that's fun, right? Like, that's fun.
There we go. You got him, buddy.
Nice.
Another good king right there.
That's awesome, buddy. You
My arms are starting to get sore, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
We caught a pile of fish today.
We have caught a pile of fish, dude. A pile of fish.
Go to the slide here. This was last year out on Lake Ontario. And like I said in the video, one of the coolest things I get to do is figure out different techniques, right? Like, things are always started, right? The spoon. Somebody put a spoon in the water, right? Someone started the whole thing of the craze of how well a spoon works. They figured out how spoons work, and now it's pretty much a staple in salmon fishing. And the coolest thing for me is getting to try new techniques, and that being this product right here called the spin fish. The spin fish is what it basically is it's a plug. The line runs through it, it comes apart, and you can put scent inside it, and it spins. And when it spins, what I like to do is team it up with some type of a rotator, like a Pro Troll or a Spin Doctor, and I run that in front of it, and now what happens is this is constantly spinning, and then your rotator's spinning, and it gives you that good snap, right? Very much similar to the way that we would fish a fly. Very, very much the same, except what I'm now doing is incorporating scent, which I feel like is a very important part of salmon fishing. I'm going to talk more about scent in a second. But what we did is we actually went out to Lake Ontario and fished those West Coast style tactics. We fished a lead ball, we fished a rotator, we fished exactly the same setup that my buddy Jared and everybody else out on the West Coast fish over and over and over. That's their go-to presentation. They don't fish lead core, they don't fish downriggers, they don't fish divers, they fish lead balls. That's how they set it up. So the reason why we did that is because we had to figure out what is the right speed to make this presentation work. Once we figured our speeds out, we were able to then incorporate it into the way that we fish in the Great Lakes. However, we still continue to catch a lot of fish with the lead ball. And the reason why we put that on the show is because I think it's pretty interesting that with literally a chunk of lead, a rotator, and a spin fish, we were catching all these fish in the Great Lakes. And we have a lot of equipment when it comes to fishing Great Lakes, and this was a relatively simple presentation. Basically, the way that the lead ball works is the same way a dipsy diver would work on the zero setting. You don't have any outward coverage, it's fishing straight below the boat. But basically, I could say it's like the poor man's downrigger, right? We're fishing directly below the boat. If you don't have a downrigger on your boat, but you still want to be able to fish deep, the lead ball system that we did on this show, it would be a great way to do that. And we can go into that more, but I think if you're interested in the lead ball setup and the way that we set that up, all of that information is on our YouTube channel. We really kind of broke it all down. But what was important with this particular show that we shot was figuring out how to make the spin fish that has literally changed fishing on the West Coast. Every single person on the West Coast wants this presentation. And
How far back did you put that behind the Spin Doctor or the flash?
so last we changed with a lot too. So you can see I have, maybe I don't have it on there. I don't have my leader length. About 32 inches is about what we were running for
Okay.
the leader length. Now we changed that a little
Fly,
bit.
you'd run a lot shorter, you know what I'm saying?
Considerably shorter. but a fly has zero action on its own, right? The spin fish itself is constantly rotating, so that creates action. And in fact, we actually fished these to prove a point when we were curious. I ran these with no spin doctor or no pro troll in front of them. We ran them just clean on a downrigger and caught fish on that as well. I think the most important part of this presentation is scent. And we're a huge advocate of scent, especially with salmon. If you watch Fishing Forum 1, you hear us talk about scent, things like Procure, right? And for walleye fishing, I feel like it's important in some applications. It's important in cold water. It's important in cold front conditions. With salmon, it's important literally all the time. There is not a single day that I salmon fish that I don't feel like scent is not the most important part of the entire package. And we look at what are king salmon. For us, it's kind of hard as Great Lakes fishermen because they're just here in the Great Lakes, right? We put them in the Great Lakes. They come into the rivers in the fall. We catch them in the rivers in the fall. But let's look at the way that God intended a king salmon to live. A king salmon was born on a little rock, right? Swims hundreds, if not thousands of miles out into the ocean. And 4 years later, comes back to the very rock that it was born on. And it does that with its nose. King salmon smells in parts per billion. It's stronger than a white-tailed deer. We all like to deer hunt. It is such an important part of how these fish decide what they're going to eat. And so scent becomes an important part of how we catch these fish. Now again, at the beginning of the seminar I said we used to just take a lure Jensen Dipsy diver and a spoon and troll around Lake Michigan and catch all the fish we wanted. What we had back then was a lot of fish in the system. We have less fish in the system now. That doesn't mean you can't go out there and catch them. It means that you have to fool these fish, and they're not going to be in front of as many fish as we used to be. So every fish we get in front of, I want to have a chance of that fish biting, and that's where scent makes a big deal. And so this particular spin fish here, because we can load it with scent, makes it really, really fishy. And I basically just open it up, and we put Procure right inside of it, close it, and there's little holes in the back of it, and that Procure kind of just leaches out of it throughout the day. Now when I go more into scent, kind of overkill when it comes to scent. And this has been taught to me again by the West Coast guys. I've seen over and over and over again where this system works, but we clean our baits before they go in the water, and we clean our baits after every single bite. And I promise you, if you are religious in doing that, and what you want to do as fishermen is don't let me stand up here and tell you that you need to do that. What I'm telling you is do it on one side of your boat, don't do it on the other side. Fish the way you've always fished on one side of your boat, and be religious and clean your baits on the other side of the boat, and you will be blown away day after day after day. The clean side is going to outfish the side that you don't do anything with. We're fishermen. We stop at the gas station in the morning. We have gas in our hands. We have oil in your hands. That scent then transfers on to the lure that we're fishing. And again, these fish smell in parts per billion. So it's such an important part. If you put a camera down there, I've seen so many different YouTube videos of fish coming up and looking at a spoon and then swimming away, and coming up and looking at a spoon and swimming away. Now that probably still happens when I'm fishing scent, I believe that. But because it smells good and it looks good, I got a better chance of getting that fish to bite. So Procure is the reason we fish Procure. It's made with real bait scent. It's out in Salem, Oregon. They actually grind up real bait fish, turn it into the super gel, and then make it so it has a shelf life on it. And then we buy it as anglers and use it. But it's not like an artificially designed scent in a lab to smell like something. If it says alewife on the bottle, it's alewives ground up and put into that bottle. And so that's the reason we like to fish that so much. And I said that I clean my baits every time. The way that I clean it is actually with a soap called Lemon Scent Joy is what we use to clean our baits. It's literally the cheapest soap at the dollar store, right? But there was there was something that they did, like a study out on the West Coast with scent and salmon, and they put different scent in the river system as these fish were migrating up the river. They would put different types of scent in the river, and it would stop the migration for a certain amount of time, right? Like they would put human scent in, it would stop that migration of fish for a couple hours. They put bear scent in the river, it would stop that migration for whatever that time was. Then they tried different cleaning agents, and one of the cleaning agents that didn't seem to impact those fish at all, they put that in the water, and those fish just continued to migrate, was Lemon Scent Joy Non-Ultra. Non-Ultra basically means no bleach. And so that's what we use to clean our baits. I have a little Tupperware container that's right in the boat, and what I do is I put a little soap and water in that container. When I catch a fish, I take the bait, scrub it up really quick, drop it back in the water to get the soap off of it, add new scent, and then send it out again. So, I mean, when you think about setting a leg core setup, we probably have 5 to 10 minutes in setting up that system. It takes me maybe 20 seconds to clean a bait. And I'm absolutely 100% convinced that it gets us more bites. What else? You guys have any questions? I mean, I have more video, but you guys have any questions on that stuff? All right, we're gonna keep rolling to the next segment.
It seems like that spin lure would be a nightmare, you know?
What's that?
It seems like it'd be a knotty nightmare.
No, I mean, it's very important to have good swivels across everything, right? Like, I feel like, and that's something I preach in every seminar we do, is that we spend, you know, a decent amount of money on quality snaps and swivels, because that's really, it's the cheapest part of what we do as fishermen. And so we just buy quality swivels and it's not a problem.
It's the most critical part, because that connects to the hook, which,
It creates a lot of twist in the line, correct? Let's see. One of the most important pieces of technology that you're going to want to invest in when it comes to trout and salmon fishing is a product called the Fish Hawk. And what the Fish Hawk does is it gives us speed down at depth, but more importantly, it also gives us temperature down at depth. And if you know anything about trout and salmon, you know that they're very temperature sensitive and they're also very speed sensitive. And the reason for that is we have a lot of current in the Great Lakes. So when you're trolling and you look at just your surface speed, a lot of times down at depth that is different. A lot of times you're going much slower down at depth. So what happens there is you don't have very good action on your spoons, rotators, all the different presentations that we like to fish as trout and salmon fishermen. So when I talk about speed, when it comes to trout and salmon fishing, I'm talking about speed down at the ball, so down at depth. And a lot of times you can have 3, 4, 5/10 of a mile an hour difference, which is all the amount of difference it's going to take not to get bit in a day of fishing. So you want to watch your speed. And you can see right here on the graph, I have it 2.5 miles an hour right now. That's about on the top end of what I like to go for speed. I like to stay anywhere from that 2.2 to 2.5 miles an hour down at the depth. The other really important thing is temperature, and trout and salmon are very temperature sensitive. And what I like to look for is that water anywhere from the high 40s to mid 50s seem to be pretty much ideal for chasing these fish. So what I do is I drop the ball down until I find that ideal temperature, and then what I can do is I can use whatever I got to use to get that presentation down to that depth. So the Fish Hawk gives you speed at depth, it gives you temperature at depth, and it catches you a lot more fish. This clip here, in my opinion, kind of ties everything that I do as a salmon fisherman together, because it's the basis of where we start on the Great Lakes is our temperature. We are constantly chasing temperature. In the springtime, like the coho fishing I talked about, I'm looking for the warmest available water. I'm looking for 50, 55 degree water. As the water warms up, we get throughout late spring, summer, fall. Now I'm looking for colder water, right? Because as that lake warms up and you get 60, 70 degree surface temps, those king salmon are not going to be in that temperature. So we're looking for colder water. The way that we do that is with the probe system with the Fish Hawk. And what I do is I have it hooked up to my downrigger and I drop that down. I try to figure out what temperature is. That's going to dictate to me what I'm fishing that day as far as lead core lines, what my diver leads are going to be. The very first thing that I set in the water every single day are my downriggers, because I need to figure out where that temperature zone is. It's literally the foundation of what we do as salmon fishermen. So we talked about lead core, and I'm going to circle it back to lead core. If I have a 3, 5, 7, 10 color of lead core, how do I know which ones I'm putting in the water that day? Well, let's say I drop a downrigger ball down and 40, 45 feet down is that 50 to 55 degree water. That's where I'm going to try to stack as much of my gear as possible, because I don't want to be up in that warm water and I don't want to be down in the ice water. I want to be in that 50, 55 degree range. And so in that case, I'm going to be looking at fishing 7 colors of lead core. That's going to be in that range. Maybe a 5 colors would be right on the top edge of that range. I'm going to be taking my dipsy divers and I'm going to be trying to get them down in that 45 foot range. And I'm going to be running my downrigger balls down at that same depth. So what I'm doing, I'm taking all these lines and I'm trying to stack them in that zone, right? 40 down, but it might be 40 to 50 down. So now I have a 10-foot range that I'm trying to stack most of my gear in that range. Now, salmon are one of these species of fish that, like I said, in the morning, everybody's a hero, right? A salmon will feed out of temperature 2 times a day. Once first thing in the morning, we all run out in the pitch black dark and we set our gear and the sun comes up and we're catching fish like crazy. That's first thing in the morning. The same bite happens in the evening as the sun goes down, but low light periods of time, salmon will feed out of temperature. The best suggestion I have in the morning is just get gear in the water. Get out there and get gear in the water, because these fish could be high, they could be low, they could be anywhere in the water column, and they're just actively feeding at that point. But as the sun comes up, these fish are going to go down to these temperature zones, and they're going to be in these temperature zones. And so that's where it's really important for me to stack my gear within that zone. The fish hawk allows me to know what that temperature is. The other really important thing a fish hawk tells me is it tells me what my speed is down at depth. In the Great Lakes, we have subsurface currents. And so I don't really care what my speed over ground is as far as my GPS goes. When I talk about speed salmon fishing, I'm always talking about speed down at the downrigger ball itself. And so for me, honestly, you could take my sonar unit right off my boat for salmon fishing, and I don't feel like it would impact the way that I catch salmon. What I need is that fish hawk. That's the #1 tool that I need to catch these fish, because I need to know what my speed is down at depth. I need to know what the temperature is down at depth. With those two tools, I really don't need to know anything else. I mean, it's nice to have a sonar fish finder, but in the big scheme of things, if I'm over 300 feet of water targeting fish 20, 30, 40 feet down, I'm not marking those fish anyways on my sonar. The cone is so small at that high up, I'm not marking those fish. I'm just chasing the temperature itself. And so, like I said, the fish hawk does that for me. So, let's see. Most important piece of the puzzle, I can't stress that enough. You know, there's a couple different ones out there as far as that goes for speed and temp, a couple different probe companies out there, but the fish hawk one's the one I've used forever. It's the one I have the most confidence in. So when I talk about speed, and I talk about speed down at the depth, there's days, for instance, to give you an example, there's days that we're trolling 3.5 miles an hour speed over ground on the surface to try to keep 2.2, 2.3 miles an hour down at depth. Then we turn around and go the other way, and now I can't slow the boat down slow enough. I'm literally backpedaling, barely moving the boat, and we're still going fast down at depth because of those currents. It's so important. Even something like a spoon. You have to go over 2 miles an hour for a spoon to have any action. So if I think I'm going 2.5 miles an hour on the surface, but down at depth I'm going 1.4, 1.5, my spoon has no action, these fish aren't gonna bite it. It's basically just sitting down there doing absolutely nothing. And so I need to know what that speed is down there at the depth. So the fish hawk unit does that. Questions on the fish hawk?
It's kind of tough to decide what direction of a troll you take, because that could mean a lot to your speeds and the currents.
And that's where the fish
I
hawk,
mean, at times I've noticed where one side of my boat was running fine, and the other side collapsed, per se.
Right.
You know, it wasn't running good.
right, and depending on if you're cutting that current or if you're going with the current, the nice thing about the, you know, especially Lake Michigan, for the most part, our current's going north and south. So if we're making a north and south troll, places like Frankfurt, it's really easy to do a north and south troll because we're fishing the bank, we're fishing a piece of structure. Or you might find yourself in Lake Manistee, right, where it's a little bit flatter and we go all different directions when it's calm out, and you can find yourself cutting the current across one way or another. But it's really important with the fish hawk to even be able to see that. Can't tell you how many times salmon fishing in the Great Lakes, I've looked down and my speed was right, and I'm doing something in the boat and I look over and my speed is like barely moving on my fish hawk. I reach down at the throttle, I speed it up and catch 2 fish right then, right? And if I wouldn't have known that, I would have just kept trolling, right? So I hit some type of a current seam there, slowed the boat down a little bit, I sped up, got my gear moving again, and those fish were relating to that current seam in some way, and I got a couple bites there. So literally I give all the credit of that to the fish hawk itself, knowing what that speed was down there. Let's see what, I think I have another slide. Yeah, let's do this clip here quick, guys.
Whoa, just broke off too. What time? You get him in the net?
Yeah, I gotta do that.
Look at
That's
that.
a big king.
Broke him off at the last second, right
That's
when
a
you
big
put him in the
king.
net.
Yeah. Look at that.
Look at the size of that thing.
Spring kings, they don't get a heck of a lot better than that. That's a really nice fish.
That's a beautiful fishing. With 10-pound test, my walleye planer board rods, and sometimes it's better to be lucky than good because that fish literally broke off as you were scooping them with the net. Oh, what a beautiful fish.
Let's talk a little bit about plug colors for salmon. In the Great Lakes, salmon plugs seem to produce better when there's a lot of silver on them, and then the other colors you're looking for is green and chartreuse. If you get those combinations on a plug, they're probably going to catch fish for you anywhere in the Great Lakes that you find king salmon and coho salmon. And 3 colors here that I just can't live without. The first one here is called Green Machine. The other one is called Grinch. And the one down here on the end is called Lemonhead. These 3 routinely work for us wherever we take them. Those 3 colors will get you lots of salmon, and they'll also do well on other things like steelhead and brown trout as well.
Just kind of going back over with the mag lip again. It's one of these baits, like I said, it's my confidence bait. So it's a really easy one for me to promote because we just simply catch a lot of fish on this bait. But as far as colors go, like my dad said in the video, chartreuses, greens, green and chartreuse. I mean, if you look at my salmon box, they all have a lot of the same characteristics. I have a lot of faith in the color green, a lot of faith in obviously your chrome colors, your metallic colors. And that comes from fishing clean water. Salmon tend to be in a little bit cleaner water, and you get that clear water, and you get that nice flash. Kind of brings the same aspect of a spoon. The reason why a spoon works so well, with a silver back, clean water, you're getting that flash from the spoon. This crankbait has so much action when it's diving back and forth that's creating flash, getting very much the same type of action or type of presentation as what a spoon would be. This particular show is really cool. We shot this at the mouth of the Niagara River, and we went there with all of our traditional salmon gear, thinking we could run offshore and fish an area that they call the Niagara Bar. When we got there, we had some guide buddies tell us, hey, we're getting fish right at the mouth of the river right now, and we're catching them in like 15, 20 feet of water. Well, I really didn't have any gear for that, but I did have our walleye stuff in the boat. And so we grabbed our walleye gear, literally our 10-pound test monofilament. That's why I broke that fish off right at the net. We caught that fish with 10-pound mono. And we just grabbed our walleye gear and we went out flatlining, maglet plugs. We caught just a pile of fish. But that same thing happens more often than you think. We go back to springtime now, right? It's right now spring. When these salmon start to bite, which they're just starting to bite, getting in that high 40-degree water temps, they're going to be relatively shallow. Flatlining a crankbait is a great way to catch these fish, and it's a very simple way. Again, you can use your walleye gear. And let me tell you, it's a handful. When you hook into a 15, 20-pound king with 10-pound test, you got your hands full. But it's very doable to go do that. So maybe you're getting into salmon fishing right now and you don't have a ton of leg core lines and all that stuff set up. You know, you can go out with your walleye type gear and go out and catch some salmon. Right now in the spring's a great time to do that because the fish are close to shore. And then again in the fall, that August time frame, going into September, the fish come back up into the rivers at that time, and it makes it very easy to target salmon. And the last thing I'm going to leave you guys on before we're done with this seminar is I get this all over the place. I get told, well, I don't salmon fish because I'm not going to buy a big boat and I'm not going to run out to 300 feet of water and I'm not going to target salmon 100 feet down. And the truth of the matter is you just simply don't have to target those fish at that time. There's a time frame in the summer when the water gets really warm where the temperature ends up going very deep, right? That same 50, 55 degree water temp might be 100 feet down. At that point, then we need a lot of different types of equipment to target these fish. I used to work on the back deck of a charter boat, and we had that equipment because we had to catch fish every single day. If those salmon went down there 100 feet, we had to chase them down there to 100 feet, and we had to fish things like 600 coppers and run 25-pound downrigger balls and run mag dipsy divers. And it's very difficult to target those fish at those depths, but we had to do it as a charter boat, right? Got to catch fish. The truth of the matter is there's a lot of times of the year that we can target kings in that top 50 feet of the water column, 60 feet of the water column. That's where lead core lines, very achievable with lead core lines. Fishing divers, fishing downriggers, very achievable to reach those depths, and no matter what type of boat that you have. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Springtime's a great time to target these fish. August is a great time to target these fish. But then you also want to look in the summertime. There are times with the way that the wind blows, it'll bring cold water back up to the surface. So I'm not telling you not to go out there in June and July. If you have cold water, there's going to be fish high. The reason why I say this is I can't tell you how many times we've targeted kings in 350 feet of water. Super deep, right? But we're targeting them in the top 40 feet of the water column. So once you get past the mindset that you're over a lot of water, you're still targeting them the same way. You're still only fishing that top zone of water. Very achievable to catch those fish in that depth. So that's pretty much what I have for you guys for salmon fishing. We'll be around here a little bit more at the store. So if you have any other questions, make sure you stop and talk more about salmon fishing. But I appreciate you guys coming out today talking about salmon fishing here at J Sporting Goods. Thanks, guys.